Who is the UFC GOAT? In any sport, it is a hotly discussed topic, and when it comes to the world's leading MMA promotion, things really are no different. The organization has transcended the sport and sent it to new levels in recent years, which is largely down to the superstars that have graced the octagon. 1. Jon Jones. MMA record, 28-1. Jon Jones is considered by a large majority, including UFC CEO Dana White, to be the greatest fighter to have ever set foot in the octagon. Before winning the UFC heavyweight championship last year, Bones reigned twice as light heavyweight titleholder. He held the gold at 205 pounds from March 2011 to April 2015 and from December 2018 to August 2020. His first title saw him become the youngest champion in UFC history with his title victory over Mauricio Rua at age 23, which many that age could scarcely dream of. He holds many UFC records in the light heavyweight division, including the most title defenses, most wins, and longest win streak, but has also made a remarkable impact after bulking up to incredible shape to make the move up to heavyweight. This was even more remarkable because it came after a 2-year hiatus from the sport. Jones' only official loss came via a controversial disqualification in December 2010, which many would like to see overturned. However, he further enhanced his reputation as the greatest of all time by beating Stipe Miocic in comfortable fashion at UFC 309, defending his heavyweight title for the first time in the process. 2. Anderson Silva. MMA record, 30. Simply fighting because he loved to compete more than anything else. That he could lose 5 of his last 6 fights and still be considered one of the greatest fighters to ever step into the octagon says a lot about how truly brilliant the Brazilian was in his prime. 3. Georges St-Pierre. MMA record, 26-2. Georges St-Pierre reigned as a 2-division champion in the UFC, having won titles in the welterweight and middleweight divisions. He won the UFC welterweight crown on 3 occasions, having raised the full title, twice alongside the interim belt. The Canadian hero lost twice in his career, to Matt Hughes and then Matt Serra, but would later avenge both defeats inside the octagon. He retired as the reigning welterweight champion in December 2013, having held the record for most wins in title bouts and the second longest combined title streak in UFC history, 2,204 days, while defending his title 9 consecutive times. He returned to the octagon in November 2017 at UFC 217, when he defeated Michael Bisping by submission to win the middleweight title, becoming the 4th fighter in the history of the UFC to be a multi-division champion. He won an incredible 13 straight fights before finally calling time on his career. 4. Khabib Nurmagomedov. MMA record, 29-0. Khabib Nurmagomedov is the most dominant lightweight of all time in a division where he was the longest reigning champion in history, holding the title from April 2018 to March 2021. With 29 wins and no losses in the UFC, he retired with a perfect record. It's one which will likely rarely be matched given his ability to completely take control of fights with his elite wrestling and killer submissions. The Eagle took on some of the best towards the back end of his career, and was one half of the most iconic rivalry in UFC history against bitter enemy Conor McGregor. Their fight at UFC 229 is still the company's biggest selling pay-per-view ever. Khabib fought just twice more after that victory, before deciding to retire following a win over Justin Gaethje. He may well have been placed further up this list if his career had continued, but he acted on the wishes of his mother and late father by deciding to walk away from active competition. He has since gone on to mentor current champion Islam Makhachev, who is following in his footsteps as lightweight champion. 5. Demetrious Johnson. And from the sport in an emotional speech on the 6th of September 2024 inside the One Cage. 6. Jose Aldo. MMA record, 32-9. Jose Aldo returned to action earlier this year after briefly hanging up his gloves to make a move into professional boxing. The King of Rio announced his comeback in fine style by defeating Jonathan Martinez at UFC 301, but he then lost at UFC 307 a few months later to Mario Bautista via split decision. However, it was earlier in his career that Aldo truly pressed his claim for GOAT status. Between May 2006 and December 2015, Aldo never lost a fight, racking up 18 straight wins, including 7 consecutive defenses of the UFC Featherweight Championship. The Brazilian legend was always entertaining too, scoring stoppage wins over the likes of Chad Mendes and the Korean Zombie, Young Chan Sung. Unfortunately for Aldo, he is likely to always be remembered as the man on the wrong side of a 13-second KO by Conor McGregor, but that defeat alone shouldn't define his career. He is widely considered to be the greatest featherweight fighter in history. 7. Alexander Volkanovski. MMA record, 26-4. One of the most dominant featherweights ever to have ever graced the division, Alexander Volkanovski has become one of the promotion's most legendary fighters, given his supreme skills and desire to step into the octagon with absolutely anybody. Having overcome multiple challengers at 145 pounds including Max Holloway, Jose Aldo, and Chad Mendes, the Australian superstar stepped up in weight to take on lightweight champion Islam Makhachev twice. Volkanovski's willingness to fight anyone at any time was summed up by him taking his second clash with the Russian on a week's notice after making a phenomenal weight transformation. Unfortunately, his relentless activity may have caught up with him in his most recent fight, as he was brutally knocked out by Ilia Topuria at UFC 298, losing his featherweight title in the process. Despite losing 3 of his last 4 fights, Volkanovski's resume makes him a dangerous opponent for anyone in his weight class. It would be no surprise to see him reign as champion again. 8. Daniel Cormier. MMA record, 22-3. A former 2-weight UFC champion in both the light heavyweight and heavyweight division, Daniel Cormier is the second fighter in the promotion's history to hold titles in 2 weight classes simultaneously after Conor McGregor, and stands as the first to have successfully gone on to defend those titles. A trendsetter and record breaker, DC, has formed an aggressive rivalry with Jon Jones, which is often compared to Mike Tyson's with Evander Holyfield in boxing, who he famously fought twice, with the latter overturned to a no contest after his rival failed a drugs test. Cormier retired in 2020 after back-to-back defeats in the heavyweight division against Miocic, but his legacy will not be affected given his prior achievements, which have also earned him a slot as a regular pundit on UFC events. His likable personality and skills inside the cage see him rightly celebrated as a legend of the sport. 9. Stipe Miocic. MMA record, 20-5. Stipe Miocic is considered one of the greatest natural heavyweights to have ever graced the division, having reigned as a champion twice with longevity and consistency being the key to his overwhelmingly successful spell. The American has some huge scalps to his name from many different eras, including Daniel Cormier, Francis Ngannou, Alistair Overeem, and Andrei Arlovski. His power-punching style and aggressive nature sees him carry an ever-present knockout threat, which has certainly helped him entertain the paying fans, and establish his status as one of the very best ever. 10. Kamaru Usman. MMA record, 20-4. Kamaru Usman has been placed on the list due to his dominant spell in the welterweight division, where during his prime he reigned as champion swatting away challenges from some of the toughest fighters in the weight class. The Nigerian Nightmare has scored multiple wins over the likes of Jorge Masvidal and Colby Covington with scalps against former UFC champions Leon Edwards, Sean Strickland, and Tyron Woodley. His first UFC loss came in August 2022 in an incredible co-defeat against Edwards, but unfortunately it has sparked a poor run of form as he now sits on a 3-fight losing run. Dana White is known to be a fan of the 37-year-old, and he will almost certainly be given the chance to end his UFC run on his own terms. Despite his recent hardships, Usman is one of the very best to ever compete at 170 pounds.